Good morning, Internet. How are you? It's only morning where I'm at. It's probably not morning where you're at, but welcome to another episode of CJ Live. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'm Chase Jarvis. I'm a photographer and a director. I hope you're familiar with my work, but I'm actually more excited to introduce you to a guest that we've got today. Amazing show coming up. His name is Chris Jordan. Before I bring Chris on, I got a handful of thanks I want to throw out there. First of all, thank you for tuning in. Second of all, big thanks to Polaroid for making all of this stuff possible, and to B&H, who have been very, very generous with the gear. It takes a lot of work and a lot of technology and equipment to make this happen, so huge thanks to those folks. Also, between announcing the Chris Jordan show today, or a couple days ago, and now here on the old breaking into the show, there have been a couple people who've been retweeting and have said some really interesting things in their retweets. I wanted to give signed limited edition Chris Jordan books out to two folks whose names are Inez Lemons and Eric Lee Pearson. So you two folks, send an email to contest@ChaseJarvis.com and we'll get these books right out to you. So huge thanks to you all. See, other announcements before we dive into the show. As soon as I'm done with this show, I'm literally hopping in a car and heading down to the airport to get on a plane to go to the old New York City. And at New York City, I will be doing, it's a group show that I'm really, really lucky to be participating in. It's a show that I've pulled together with my friends at Polaroid and 50 other incredible artists. We all created some work using zinc paper from the new Polaroid GL10, and there's a big, very cool auction going on at Phillips DePury. The show actually opens at their gallery space on 15th West, I think, starting today. It's open till the 13th, and then next Wednesday, the 14th, there's a red carpet charity event. So if you're in New York now, you can head out, and as soon as the show's over, of course, and go check out that the exhibition. Some amazing, amazing artists. If you search 50-50-50 on the blog, you'll get some information there. But I'm going to be there all week, and I'm hoping to bump into some of you folks out there in the internet world, perhaps in the New York City. Let's see. Reminder that throughout the whole show, we're going to be taking your questions live. On Twitter at #CJLive. If you want to ask Mr. Chris Jordan, which as soon as you hear him start talking, I know you're going to want to ask him a bunch of questions because he's a brilliant man. But feel free to send in those questions there. Also, there is a new feature here that we were asked, that you guys asked, and we put it in there, and it's probably right there if you're looking at the live page, which is an email sign up. If you want to get notified, the day of, the day before about future shows, then put your email in that little box and we'll let you know. So you guys requested it, we delivered it. That is all the intro stuff, all the yucky stuff that I have to talk about. It's not yucky, it's kind of fun, but I'm really excited to get into the show, which is it's a doozy of a show. Chris Jordan is an amazing artist. I was impressed with his work long before I knew Chris, and then I found out he lived in Seattle. We met one day, and Chris actually came to my studio and I photographed him for the Seattle 100 project a few years ago now, and since then we've been able to stay in touch and stay good friends, and so it was with there's a lot of excitement in me getting him on the show. It took us about over a year to wrangle our schedules together. Chris is going to come on the show and he's going to drop a lot of knowledge, and part of that dropping knowledge is another contest that kicks off right now, which is if you hear something that inspires you, something interesting, and you quote that, it's probably going to be more Chris than quotes from yours truly, but you can, any quote will do. If you quote, find something that's inspirational, you throw it in a tweet, plus @Polaroid, and the URL to take people to this location here online at ChaseJarvis.com/live, or any bit.ly version or whatever of it. I will take a picture or two of Chris, and you will win a signed, one-of-a-kind Polaroid that I shoot of Chris. So Spread the word if you're inspired by what this man, the knowledge that he's about to drop on the show. Please join me in welcoming Chris Jordan. Woo! Thanks, buddy. Come on.
Chase. Really good to see you again.
Please, please. We have to pretend again that you haven't been here for the last hour and that you and I haven't been visiting already, but it's an amazing opportunity for me to connect with you again and to introduce you to a worldwide audience of people who, many of whom are already familiar with your work, some of whom are not. And I'm going to take a little bit of time and tell the backstory, if I can. I've been following your work for a long time. Running the numbers blew my socks off. I don't remember where I first saw it. I started emailing you, and I think you were very, very gracious in your response. I reached out again a month or two later and introduced the Seattle 100 project. We spent some time in front of the camera and got some amazing pictures of you, and by my count, we've been fast friends ever since. Did I blow anything there? Is that?
There was something you did when you took that portrait of me, and I've never been able to quite capture what it was, but I just felt so much warmth from you from behind the camera. And I just got back from Kenya, where it was the first time I've ever photographed people.
Wow.
And I kept thinking, what would CJ do? Like, how does he convey that warmth from behind this big digital piece of electronics?
Right.
Yeah, you did something that just made me feel so comfortable. So anyway, so good to see you again. It's been
man.
much too long.
Thank you so much. And speaking of returning, you've just returned from Midway, is that correct? Or where were you was it Kenya? Kenya, and then
Both,
Midway.
yeah, like back to back.
The life of a fine art photographer who travels the world. Well, shit, congratulations on your success, man. So cool. One of the things that I wanted to kick off the show with is I get asked a lot of times, like, how did you get to where you are? And most of the questions come from photographers, but one of the things that I think is fascinating about your specific story is there are millions of people out there that are in a job that they are not happy with, that's not giving them life fulfillment, and are looking to transition. I'm always offering and suggesting that people transition into a life of creativity, not because it's easy, because it's certainly hard and hardworking, and all those things are required, but the joy that it brings to make things for a living, and especially when you've come from something, come from a different background. Your story is a fascinating one. Would you tell, I guess, me and the folks at home a little bit of background about it? You were an attorney, right?
Yeah, my whole legal career, it was like when I look back on it now, it was a decade where I was just afraid of life. I was afraid to live, afraid to take the risk of living. And because I've been photographing for like 25 years.
Got it.
And so to me, like, people seem to be interested in how I got out of the legal profession, but actually my own process, like, I'm interested in why did I go in there in the first place? And when I really look at that, it was just because I was afraid. You know, because there's some paths in the world that are more secure, where you can sort of know that you're going to end up making money and be safe. And there are other paths that require holding on to anxiety and fear because you don't know what's coming next. And those other paths, the sort of creative paths, that's kind of what I've always been into. And I just got scared for about a decade there.
I want to laugh at it. To me, and it's easy to laugh about at this point for me, mostly because I've worked through it and you've worked through it. But when I think of my background, it's very much the same. I had two challenges I had to overcome specifically in my mind. One is I was an artist trapped in an athlete's body. So I went to college on a soccer scholarship, and jock and artist never really went together. And so it was kind of trapped inside me. And one of the things that set that free for me was, was the punk skate scene. Like, these people were very, very creative and very, very artistic. However, they were athletes too. Like, okay, it's okay for me to do this. And the other one was, you were at law school, it was medical school. God, don't want to do it. Excuse me, I got something in my throat here.
Dude, what's up with the glasses? You're supposed to have like 6 packs of little plastic bottled water around, aren't you?
Hey.
Tap water in a glass?
Tell the world about that.
I'm stunned.
Hey, how about it? Tell the world. Why does that mean something to you, Chris, what you just said?
Well, it's kind of ironic that we have my book sitting right here that has my photograph of 2 million plastic bottles on the cover. That's how many plastic bottles we consume in the United States every 5 minutes.
I don't know if you can get a shot of that, but one of y'all, can you get that? I'm sorry, I think.
And you know, that issue, along with hundreds of others, it's like this unconscious habit that I got in just as much as anybody else. I started drinking plastic bottled water and thinking it was safer and somehow better for me, and I went for several years and just like got into this habit. And when hundreds of millions of people all get into a habit like that, it can produce this unintended consequence that nobody wants. That, you know, in the case of plastic bottled water and our plastic bottled drinks, one of the unintended consequences is millions of tons of plastic out in our oceans.
Millions of tons. Is that right? Millions of tons.
Yeah, and that's like millions of tons. When I hear a number like that,
right? I don't even know.
It doesn't even go in one ear and out the other ear. It just goes in one ear and bounces straight back out that ear. It's like nothing registers. Millions of tons. Is that? Well, the ocean is trillions of gallons or something. Like, is that too much? Is millions of tons of plastic? Is that is that only a little bit? Or like we lack the ability to comprehend these gigantic numbers.
Well, I'm very glad that we had glass on set today, because for the last guest we had plastic, and it was not intended. We usually have glass, but every once in a while we are not on our game. And the point that you bring up was the point that attracted me to your work originally, and that was these amazing prints that you created after you transitioned out of this culture of fear that you call it, to making photographs. And did you go right in this first body of work that we'll dive into is called Running the Numbers? And when I first saw a gigantic piece, I don't remember how big it was, but it was massive, and it was like, wait a minute. And it was the one I saw first, I think, was the plastic cups. The airline, how many cups on an airline? The airlines
1 million plastic cups, yeah.
That was remarkable. So talk to me about the transition from this culture of fear and being in the safe world, letting go to becoming an artist, and then diving into this first body of work. Walk me through that transition for you.
Well, for many years I'd been photographing, and I had like 5 or 6 whole bodies of work that I've still not exhibited anywhere.
Wow.
And that work was all really focused just on color. Okay. Like, I loved color, and in a kind of naive way maybe, because it wasn't really engaged with the real world very much. Right. And I looked at the work of artists like Andreas Gursky, you know, or Richard Mizrak, whose work is not only gorgeous from a formal standpoint, you know, they're as beautiful as the most beautiful paintings, but they're also engaged in the contemporary world in this really powerful way, and I just craved that. But I couldn't figure out how to get there. Like, I didn't want to let go of the beauty and go take kind of ugly pictures of contemporary issues. Right. So it happened kind of really by happenstance, is that I found a giant pile of garbage down in the port of Seattle. And I photographed it with my 8x10, is what I was working with at the time, 8x10 film.
I've seen that photograph of you with the bellows. That's a gorgeous, gorgeous camera.
I loved working with those cameras.
Such a cool camera.
Yeah. And I made a print of this huge pile of garbage. And all I was interested in at the time was the color, because that's what I'd been doing for years and years, is sort of making photographs of a particular, like, complex and beautiful palette of color in a place you wouldn't expect to find it, like a giant pile of garbage. And that was my favorite photograph that I'd ever taken. Like, it perfectly fit this concept that I've been working with for like 20 years or something.
Working with here, but not necessarily like actualizing, right? The concept.
Well, it perfectly fit the concept of making photographs that are beautifully colored.
Got it.
But like, I didn't want to take photographs of like fruit stands,
right?
You know, because we know about those colors. I was looking for a particular kind of like unexpected color all those years, and I found it in this pile of garbage. So I photographed it just for that reason. And it was other people who came over and looked at this print on my wall who said, "Well, I love the colors, but what I see is a macabre portrait of America. Like, this is." There's something cutting edge about making really gorgeous photographs about our waste.
Right.
And that's when the light bulb went on. I was like, oh yes, relevance. I finally made a relevant photograph after 20 years.
20 years. I actually have a post on the blog yesterday about a National Geo guy, Sam Ebel, who had hunted a particular photograph for at least a year before he was satisfied with the image that he got. We're talking now 20 years of rough conceptualization focused on solving a particular problem and unlocking the thing that was going to free you into the next body of work, and it was a pile of garbage. You know, this picture's garbage.
So symbolic. Yeah, I remember I used to take my 8x10 film into the lab to get processed, and they'd be like, "Here comes Chris Jordan with more of his garbage."
Bum bum.
Yeah.
Well,
But so that project kind of evolved,
Okay.
and I started kind of dropping into this issue of our waste. And so I travel around and find giant piles of crushed cars, or giant piles of broken glass, or giant piles of cell phones, and at the same time I started reading about our mass consumption, and I discovered this vast body of literature out there that talks about it in these massive statistics. You know, so you read these charts of millions of tons of these waste streams, and I learned that every day in Seattle, every single day, we have a garbage train that leaves Seattle. A mile-long freight train filled with garbage leaves Seattle every single day, headed down to a landfill in Portland.
thank God it's going to Portland. No.
Actually, not in Portland, in Oregon, like in the hills.
Now, so first of all, that's horrific because I live in Seattle every day. A full freight train full of garbage.
A mile long, and that the last time I checked in on that was like a couple of years ago, so it could be
2 miles long.
it'd be bigger by now.
God.
But one of the things that I discovered is when we read these statistics about our mass culture, whether it's something to do with our waste or whether it's like 1.2 billion people in the world right now who lack access to safe drinking water. We read a statistic like that, and our mind just doesn't have the ability to comprehend it. And as a photographer out taking photographs, I'm trying to comprehend it myself. Like, I'm trying to stand in front of these massive piles of garbage and behold the scale of our waste. But I realize what I'm really, like when I'm standing in front of a giant pile of garbage at a waste processing facility down in the Port of Seattle, like I'm thinking, man, I've never seen so much garbage. This is like getting behind the Disneyland ride and seeing the scary, ugly, oily machine that's running it. This is the scale of our waste. And then a massive front loader comes and picks up the entire pile and like dumps it on a ship, and then in comes another front loader and dumps an entirely, like the same size pile again. And I'm realizing that I'm not looking at the scale of our consumption at all. I'm seeing like one drop in a river. And that's all I can ever see as a photographer.
Hence the body of work that you moved into, right? Is that it's trying to show some scale of...
Well, there was a while there where I was craving to go, like, I'll go anywhere, I'll travel anywhere to stand in front of the Mount Everest of our waste. And of course, there is no such place. You know, these issues, whether it's our waste or, sort of cultural things like medical issues, the number of people who are addicted to painkillers or whatever, like these vast cultural issues are spread out over thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of different locations. Right. And they're never all collected in one place where you can go and have a sensory experience of them.
There's
like
so
the
much
only
tension
way we can,
in that.
Yeah.
So much tension in that. And when I think about your work, and your work does the best job that I've ever personally come to know of making those numbers relevant, because when you stand in front of one of your pieces and you say this is 1 million plastic cups and it's a photograph of 1 million cups and your jaw's hanging out, and you actually go through because you can process 1 million, right? You can say, wow, this is 1 million. And then the kicker to your work is when you read the subtext or the explanation, it says, this is the amount of plastic cups used by the airlines in 1 hour or 1 day, and then you start doing the math. That's horrific. And you're still defending, if I'm not mistaken, that you can't actually still grapple with those numbers because they're too massive, right? I mean,
well, yeah, it's one of the things that constantly frustrates me about my Running the Numbers series is like all they really are is signposts that point in the direction of comprehending these issues.
Got it.
It's like, you know, looking at a giant canvas of 11,000 jet flights, 11,000 jet trails, which is 8 hours of our jet flights.
Oh.
It's a little bit better than reading the number. But to really comprehend jet travel in the United States, you have to think of how did all those airports get paved? And all the factories that are creating the trucks, and all the factories that are creating machines that build the airplanes, and the extraction of the fuel, all like it's this massive process.
Before I crawl onto the couch here, because I'm horrified at all of these things we're talking about, I wanna try and isolate one thing. And I want to go back a little bit between that moment where you've left the safe career as an attorney and gone into this new world for you, which is you've been photographing your whole life, presumably. You move into this new career, and you in some ways stumbled on what became your life's work. I feel like a lot of folks at home, I feel like I have gone through this process. A lot of folks at home want to go through this process, have or are still waiting to go through this process of finding the calling. And it's a huge problem for artists because they go around and photographers say, I don't have a style. How do I get a style? I gotta and my recipe, which is weak sauce at best, is that you have to take a hell of a lot of pictures and you have to go adventure the world before, and you have to look inside to find out what actually is meaningful to you. Can you talk to me about that? Because it's fascinating to me that you allow the story to be what it actually was, which is I stumbled on it and it hit me over the head like a ton of bricks. So many people feel like they have to fabricate this, and if they haven't fabricated their meaning, then they haven't succeeded as an artist, or this is my statement. You are so eloquent and so honest and humble in how you have found your life's work. Talk to me about that.
Well, for me, like, one of the pitfalls that I tend to have, place where I get stuck, and I think it reminds me of where I hear people get stuck, like they say, I just can't think of the idea. Like I can't figure out what my style is. It's like, I have this tendency to try to figure it out in advance. Like I want to sit on the couch, dream up the world's greatest piece of art that's going to blow everybody's mind, and then just go make it. But that for me, it never actually happens that way.
That is a great quote. If no one's retweeting that right now, you're insane.
Well, for me, the way it actually happens is it's more like, as a photographer, I just follow around behind my camera. Wow. And my camera went and took this amazing picture of a pile of garbage. I was clueless at the time, like what the meaning of that work was and where it would lead me. And so, I hate giving advice, because most of what's happened to me is just luck.
We're all looking for advice because you've done it, baby.
But the one piece of advice that I like to give to people who are sort of making the leap is like, don't try to figure it out in advance. You just have to make the leap. And once you've made the leap, then there you are. Okay, if you're a photographer, then there you are with your camera, and you got free time. Like what do you want to go photograph? And you go out and photograph and take, like you said, tons and tons of pictures and look at them all, and they all go in the garbage, except this one is like, well, that's weird. I've never seen a picture. Like, I've been looking at pictures for a lot of years, and I've never seen one that's about that subject. And so maybe I'll go back and take 100 of those. Or maybe someone will look at it and say, has it occurred to you that this is relevant to, a social issue? And you're like, no. And it's like this sort of iterative process of getting in there and sort of mucking around and letting it come.
It's a process. That's one thing that I think is so, I think a lot of folks think that professional photographers walk out, they take the picture, and oh, good, I can go home now, I'm done. And what you've just identified is something that I think is so key, is that making art is a process. And your process can be long, it can be short, it can be impacted, protracted, there's all kinds of different processes. But what you described, I think there was a couple things. One, in order to actually have a process or have a piece of art, you actually have to have, in this case, a camera. So you described following your camera. you were with your camera taking pictures. So you actually have to do something. Like you said, it doesn't come sitting here on the couch going like, you know, you're out there taking pictures. So that's one thing that I think is interesting. The second thing that I think is fascinating and is the takeaway to the folks at home, I believe, is that you showed your work to someone and they said, has it occurred to you that this is the emotion that is invoked when I look at your work? So if you hadn't taken the pictures, there's no Chris Jordan awesome artist. If you hadn't showed your work, there's no Chris Jordan awesome art. You had to be taking pictures and sharing those in some way, even if it's just with a close peer group or your wife. And there's a dialogue that gives you a little bit of context by which you can then say, this is a body work, I want to go do 100 more of these. And you can get 100 in and say, nah, I'm not feeling it. But then you just go back to, as you said, following your camera and get back into the process of making stuff. Do you think that was an accurate characterization? Like you have to do the work and then share it. Is that?
Yeah, I think putting it out there and receiving feedback is a huge, like, and especially, you know, I've had the really good fortune of having several close friends who were really open with feedback. And when you have somebody like that, it's like having an extra brain.
Yeah.
You know, it's like having 6 minds instead of one.
There's 11 minds here, and they're all smarter than me, so it's very good to surround yourself with smart people, right?
Well, you know, there's another piece to it, though, and that is I have a huge amount of belief in the power of intention. And what I mean is, like, I think most of, at least my own work, it's really unconscious. It comes from the unconscious part of my mind. And only later when I'm looking at my work do I can interpret it and you know, write an artist statement and all that stuff. But in the moment, the reason that I take that exact picture instead of a picture that's a foot over to the right, you know, the reason I frame something and the reason I fall in love with a particular subject, the reason my heart breaks when I look through, when I've got it just right and I look through and go, oh, that's it. That's something that's mysterious. It's just a feeling. It's an unconscious kind of process. And so I don't want my conscious mind to try to appropriate and sit in a chair and think, okay, what's a great piece of art that I can create? Because that's this much smaller part of my mind. It's like the unconscious is really the artist.
Right.
And so
that's where the mojo is, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so, but the conscious mind can form an intention. And I remember when I went down to New Orleans soon after Katrina with my camera, and I had no idea what I was going to photograph. I didn't know if I was going to be able to get into the areas because they were closed off by the military. I didn't know what my subject was going to be. But I had the intention of not taking sensational pictures of, you know, trucks upside down on the tops of houses, and I didn't want to take pictures of people wading through the water wrapped in American flags, like all these, what came across to me as kind of cheesy photojournalistic work that wasn't really honoring the gravity and didn't seem to me to have much feeling in it. And so I went down there with this intention of doing something other than sensational photojournalism. And I didn't know what that was going to be.
And that's still a pretty loose intention, but it is an intention, and that's the part that you're focused on, right? And so what did you, I mean, this is a beautiful transition from running the numbers into that body of work, the Katrina work. What did you come away with?
Well, the first few days down there, it was just pure shock, you know, as anybody experiences who goes into a disaster area like that. But then after that, I just began to feel my grief, a really deep sadness for not only what had happened kind of physically, like the actual hurricane and all the people who lost their homes, but the way it was being held in our culture, or not held.
Not held, really, right? Yeah. That's what we were talking about before you came on camera, is talk about the fatigue, the news cycle fatigue.
Well, that was one of the moment I decided to go down there was when I started hearing about Katrina fatigue. And Katrina fatigue, that's not the victims of the hurricane who are feeling fatigued because they lost everything they own and they're trying to figure out what to do. Katrina fatigue was all the rest of us who were just sick of hearing about Katrina. And this was only like a month and a half after the hurricane.
Horrifying.
This was in October of 2005. A month and a half later, we're all just sick of hearing about Katrina. And like, what a way to hold a tragedy like that as a culture. That just made me really sad. And so I said, okay, I'm going to go down there. I'm going to do something other than take sensational photographs and try to connect more deeply. And what presented it, like what showed up in front of my camera as I followed that big 8x10 camera around was stunning to me. You know, just these sad images.
One of the things that you said once, you and I were talking in an interview that was also captured, that's on our blog and earlier. If you want to see more Chris Jordan stuff, I've written about Chris several times. In an interview, that you don't want people, and I'm paraphrasing your words, so feel free to correct me. You don't want people to look at these images. You want them to shy away, to like, oh, you don't want it to be grotesque or gruesome because it might get them to turn off. What you're trying to get them to do, if I'm not mistaken, is to be able to look at it and actually just start to comprehend the problem. That's first of all, it's beautiful, but those are different things. Like, it's not a shock value that you're trying to, they're perfectly I think you said they're perfectly valid feelings to feel horror and shock and disgust, but you're aiming at something more. Talk to me and the people in the world that are listening about what more are you trying to do. You're not trying to scare the shit out of these people.
Yeah, and it's kind of like walking a tightrope, because the subjects that I work with, you know, I carefully choose my subjects, and lately I've had the appalling privilege of, within a week of each other, standing on Midway Island over the decomposing carcasses of tens of thousands of dead baby birds whose bodies are all filled up with plastic. And then a little more than a week later, I'm in Kenya, standing over the carcass of an elephant that had been killed the previous day for its tusks by poachers. And when they take the tusks, they have to work fast, and the tusks are rooted deeply into the skull. And so they basically cut its face off with an axe. And here I am standing in front of this carcass, and it's really powerful medicine. And the way I want to approach it, like, I know that looking at that kind of stuff can be traumatizing. Right. And it's easy to drop into a place of hopelessness and despair. You know, when you face an issue like the extinction of our elephants, or the loss of life in our oceans. You know, these are issues that can take you down a really scary rabbit hole into
I'm going there right now,
disempowerment and despair.
Pull me back, Jesus.
And at the same time, I believe that we all have to kind of grow our hearts big enough and expand our minds big enough to be able to face the realities of the times we live in. Because this stuff is all actually happening in the world. And if the only information that we have to try to relate to it is incomprehensible statistics and charts and graphs that we can't feel anything about it, then it's no wonder we're disconnected from these things, and no wonder that we're not acting with more passion and resolve.
It's a beautiful role of an artist in society, is to point, to indicate the issues that are meaningful to our culture, or most preferably the individual, to you, because that's the thing that I value. And again, there's a lot of, we're talking specifically about fine art and personal work, not necessarily commercial work, because very few people that I know are going to be interested in an advertisement, or a company's going to send you to Africa to take a picture of an elephant with its face chopped off. But one of the things that strikes me, and I think I want to resonate with people at home, is that this is very, very, very personal work. And what you've done is you've gone and taken a picture that other people can't take, because these are personal, very personal, emotional, connected issues to you. You realize, if I'm not mistaken, that it's a global problem, and that by sharing your perspective, you can positively infect and engage the minds of others to action. Is there an active part of your mission? Like, are you trying to get people to act, or is it just to internalize and realize?
Well, that's kind of where I try to draw the line between activist and artist.
Okay.
Because there's a gap between knowing about an issue, whether it's elephant poaching or the number of people in the United States who are dying from cigarette smoking, like whatever, like when you learn about an issue and then you take some kind of action, there's a gap there where we all know the issue. Like we're all educated about this stuff.
Right.
You know, global climate change, like we know,
Right.
but we aren't acting.
Yeah.
And I'm interested in that gap. And if you jump from knowing about the issue to acting, then like that's what activists are all about. It's just like the way to get you to act is just if I just wag my finger hard enough and tell you you're bad enough, then finally you're going to act. But we're jumping over something that to me is the crucial piece of the puzzle that I'm sort of playing my card on, and that is feeling something.
Here.
You know, yeah, feeling.
Right.
And so really facing the issues of the times we live in requires us to bear some very uncomfortable feelings, starting with anxiety and grief. Actually, I sort of have a hierarchy of them in my mind. I think like anxiety is the very surface one. And if you can't hold anxiety, then you never even get to any of the other ones. You just kind of have to get out and live in denial. But if you can hold some anxiety, then maybe you can get to, at least in my experience, the next one down is anger. And where's our anger as a culture right now? It's leaking out. I think there's a huge amount of anger in our culture right now. Rightful anger about what's going on in our world, but it's not being held and expressed consciously. It's leaking out in all these really frightening ways. And underneath anger is rage, and working and holding rage is an incredibly emotionally challenging experience. And finally, at least in my own experience, getting through all of that, then at the bottom is this vast ocean of grief. And my kind of underlying wish as an artist is I wish that we as a culture could get to our grief in community. Because when you feel these, like when you face these issues alone, when you face like the fact that what's happening in Somalia right now, 750,000 people are expected to die in the next 4 months in Somalia, and there's food available. They just can't get it in because of the violence. Almost 1 million people are going to be dying of starvation in Somalia in the next 4 months. If you face that issue alone, then you can go down the hopelessness, despair path.
Right.
But as soon as you begin to share those feelings in community, then something happens. There's a transformation that happens.
And that's the transformation that you seek, is it not? Like when you're talking about playing that card in that gap and some sort of activation happening, some transition between feeling the grief and calls to action. Is that fair?
Well, I just want to live in that place of feeling.
You want to live there. Okay.
Yeah, and you know, I want to test myself. I want to go stand in front of an elephant carcass and see if I can bear it. Because if I expect anybody else to bear it, I've got to sort of walk through that fire myself. And then if people see my work and feel something, I have no advice or judgments or suggestions about what they should do next. It's like it's not for me to tell you should go do this or that.
Got it.
It's just like this is something I care a lot about, and maybe I can show you how much I care about it, and maybe that might influence you. And after that, I totally respect who you are and what your life decisions are. But maybe if we could all feel a little more deeply in our culture right now, then maybe collectively we'd begin to make some conscious decisions that we aren't making.
Well, one of the things that strikes me, there's a huge list of things that strikes me, but one thing is that you have thought about your body of work so much to be able to be as articulate as you are about holding grief and being in this gap and playing your card. And that's what it means to get into your work, right? You stumbled into it. You know, you were an attorney doing something you didn't like. You stumbled into it. You realized it's a calling. And when you start applying yourself, it's clear now that you have an immense set of feelings and emotions and drive and passion and depth to what it is that you're doing. And I think that's something that so many people, photographers, artists in the world are craving, is how do I get that? Mm-hmm. And how do I get that? I look at what Chris is talking about right now. How do I hold it? And is the answer just to follow your camera? What's the answer? Is it too complicated to put in a sentence?
Well, one thing I can say is that it happened one moment at a time. It's like I didn't sit in a chair and think, okay, this is I'm going to build this, and then go out and do it. It's like I took one photograph of a pile of garbage and didn't even know that I'd taken a relevant photograph. And I've had the opportunity to show my work to tons of people and go to conferences and speak, and really smart people come up and say, I love how you use this influence in your work. And I'm like, oh yeah, I never thought of that before, but I'll use that in the future.
Yeah, exactly. Wow.
And it's just been this long, slow kind of building process that it really feels to me like it happened to me. And it's happening to me rather than something that I'm actually.
Yeah, I talked about personal style and photographic style and artistic style and that. It's something that happens through a process if you're taking a lot of pictures. You can't emerge photograph number one with a style. I mean, it's a process. And we talked a little bit about process. If you're just now tuning in, I'm Chase Jarvis. I'm live with a good friend, an amazing photographer, activist, Chris Jordan. His work is very, very profound on a global level. I was originally moved by your work years and years and years ago. We've since become friends, and we're talking about transitioning out of a career that has no meaning to you into a creative career, wrestling with the problems that an artist wrestles with, and trying to find a direction for your work. We haven't talked at all about commercial stuff because this is about very, very deeply and profoundly personal work that Chris does. I want to talk about the Midway project in just a second. I want to go to the phones in also just a second. So remember, I'm taking your questions and passing them on to Chris Jordan here. Hashtag CJ Live, ask away. If anything that we're talking about here is confusing to you, or you want some clarity, ask away. I'll come back and check the phones in just a second, but for now, what I'd love to do, if you're comfortable taking a little break and walking about 10 feet over on the steel door over there, what we've got is 2 of your prints from Running the Numbers hung up there. And there's a body of work that I think D'Artagnan's got queued up, and he'll be able to scroll through a couple of those if he hasn't already. But what I want to do is I want to walk over there and point that camera over our shoulders at 2 pieces that you brought with you today. Can we do that? In the meantime, ask questions, and we'll come back and take those. Please join me over here, Chris. Okay. So again, from the series Running the Numbers, tell us what it is that we're looking at right now.
Well, this is a print I had rolled up sitting out on my studio table. That's a work print from the Running the Numbers series that we just stuck on the wall with magnets here. And when you stand back at a distance, what you see, hopefully, is the Mayan calendar. And I'm really interested in the Mayan calendar because there's this sort of idea that it's a prophecy of doom that's supposed to happen next year.
2012, right?
Yeah.
We're done. We're
Sometime
cooked.
next year, the world is going to mysteriously end by some act of the gods. And the Mayans predicted this centuries ago, and we're all stuck with the world ending next year. And there are a lot of people that believe that, and there's sort of a cultural vibe about it, even among people who say they don't believe it.
Right.
We all sort of believe the world's going to end next year somehow.
Right.
And my own belief is, if the world is going to end, it's not going to be by some act of God coming from over there. It's going to be by what we humans are doing to the world. And that's what I think we need to be focusing on. And right now, the world is actually ending for 925 million people. Who that's the number of people in the world right now who are starving, who
Have no food.
Who don't have enough food.
925 million.
925
Right
million
now.
people in the world. And that statistic came out before the current crisis in Somalia. So it's
Probably
it
a
may
billion.
bump over a billion within.
And there's more than a billion without water as well.
Without access to safe drinking water.
Got it.
Yeah.
So how does this translate into representing that figure?
Well, all of the running the numbers pieces, when you stand back at a distance, it looks like one thing, and then when you walk up very close, you see that it's made of thousands or hundreds of thousands of something completely different. And in this case, when you get up very close, you can see that it's made of plant seeds. These are heirloom agricultural plant seeds that I got from a seed bank. So you can see there are beans and sunflower seeds and squash seeds and all different kinds of agricultural plant seeds. So this is 92,500 plant seeds.
Represented in this
image right here. And that's 1/100th of 1% of the people in the world right now who don't have access to enough food. So it would take 10,000 of this print.
Which we don't have enough magnets to put 10,000.
I ran the numbers just out of curiosity. How big would 10,000, and at this size it would be 8 football fields.
To be an accurate representation of the number of seeds representing a person who is without food right now in the world.
Yeah.
Beautiful, conceptual, incredibly powerful.
So I call this piece Maya.
Maya. Wow. Heavy. Can we look at the next one, Chris?
So this one over here, I was standing out in my garden really late at night not so long ago looking up at the full moon. And I sort of had this cliche thought, which is we all look up at that same moon. You know, everybody in the world, whether they're, whoever they are, however old they are, whatever conditions they're living under, we all look up and sort of dream. You know, there's something beautiful and dreamlike about the moon. And I was standing there, and I had just read an article about how many people in the United States are losing their homes and having to declare personal bankruptcy.
Right.
And how, you know, so many Americans' dreams are crashing right now. And so and I had this idea, well, what about if I make the moon, which is sort of silvery looking, and credit cards are kind of silvery. And so I thought, how about making the moon out of lots and lots of credit cards? And so, and that's, in sort of an annoying way, that's how the creative process tends to happen with these running the numbers pieces. Like conceptual art is different that way from photography,
right.
Where with conceptual art you actually do have the idea in advance. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times it changes as the piece goes, right. But I have this idea that doesn't really feel like it comes from me, it comes to me. It's like, oh, the moon made out of lots of credit cards.
You read the news, stood under the moon, the two came together, they synthesized, and you felt compelled to go make this
yeah,
piece.
And like the idea is presented to me, and it comes as just like this instantaneous electrical jolt with a zapping sound, and then I'm like, oh.
Pain, grief.
That means I have to go get 1,000 credit cards from somewhere, scan every single one of them.
You don't have 1,000 credit cards?
Well, this is another way to look at this piece. This is all my maxed out credit cards. And then it's like weeks of kind of tedious work to produce the piece, but that's the only way to get the result, and I really wanted to make this piece. So.
Is there anything that you do or you could prescribe? I know prescribing the creative process to anyone else is always difficult, and I tend to resist it, but is there anything you can talk to me about or to the world about? I have things that I do, but I want to know what Chris Jordan does with being attuned to these things. Because if you're running through the world at 100 miles an hour, mm-hmm. It's hard to stop and look at the moon and read about credit card debt and put those two things, synthesize those things. So what are you doing? What do you do to stay open to receiving this information?
That's a toughie. I so frequently I learn about something that I was completely clueless about.
Well, I think there's a lot of that going on in this program right now, which is, I'm hoping that that's cool for them. But like when you're learning, does it hit you like a truck? How do you look at art? Do you meditate? Or is it just, I mean, you got to go get your groceries and do the laundry like everybody else. How do you stay open to receiving these messages?
Well, I sort of do all that stuff, but I don't have the discipline to like sit down and read the newspaper every day, and I usually I can't find a media source that feels really straightforward.
Right.
Like there's so much sensationalism and anger and hatred and so I don't really know where to find the news. So where I get my news is I hang out with a lot of really smart people who are well read and who pay attention. And I'm on a few lists where people sort of cull through and send stuff. But what I get is all the worst of the worst.
Because they want you to help tell their story, though, probably. You know, the world is looking to you as an artist who works in this medium and with this mentality to share the story. So I'm going to send you my horrible stories and hope that you'll do something with them.
Well,
don't send me that story, please, Chase. No.
Well, and I'm trying to think right now, like, how do I do a piece about what's happening in Somalia? You know, what is 750,000 people divided by the next 4 months? So it's 1/4 of 750,000, whatever that is, like
200,000 or 180, something like that. That's a lot.
180,000 people per month in the next 4 months are going to die of starvation in this place in Africa that food could be gotten there. And like, how do I honor that issue and create a piece that contains some of the complexity? I have no idea, but like that's sort of what I've got my compass pointed to right now, is a piece about the famine in Somalia.
Wow. From credit card debt in America to death from lack of food and nutrition in Somalia. Heavy stuff. I'd like to go back to the couch, see if any folks in the world have a question that we might be able to answer. Scott, while we're heading over there, do you think you could get a close-up on this? This is these credit cards are amazing. I can't believe you have this many maxed out credit cards. Now let's join me back here on the couch, and maybe we can get a close-up while we're moving back here. Hey, you know, one of the things I like to do, Chris, is shoot a portrait of my guests and give that away. I shot a couple, as you know, before we started the show. I'd love to rip one off now, if you don't mind. I got it. It's right there. Cool. Thank you, buddy. Hey, Norton, you want to flip this over in 20 seconds for me? Cool. Let's go to the phones. Lighten up a little bit. It's one of the things that I've always loved our friendship, because you make me think in ways that I can't carry this weight around with me on a daily basis. Seems like you hold it so beautifully clear in your mind and you laugh more than so many people that I know. You're like a beacon, you know, that I've photographed you, and I've got a couple images of you laughing that are just absolutely remarkable. And you just do such a good job of being present and holding, as you said, kind of the grief and yet living a beautiful, beautiful life. It's very admirable.
Oh, well, you know, this is part of what's been happening for me with my Midway work. Is as I got into that project, I realized that I've spent like the last 5 years working from a kind of psychological space, like a paradigm or whatever you would call it, like a perspective on the world that is, the world is this giant screwed up place, and we've got so many horrible problems, and we're not solving them, and we're all going down the tubes. And that's true. Like, I don't want to negate that or turn away from it. It's just that there's this other perspective you can look at the world from too. And there are millions of other perspectives, but one other one that has come to me is, oh my God, we've got a miracle on our hands that is mysterious and incomprehensibly beautiful, which is that each of us got to be born into this astonishing world, and here we are. Like, oh, whoa.
What are we going to do with this now, though?
And it's so beautiful and so, it's ecstatic and joyful and wondrous, far beyond our ability to comprehend.
That's why you laugh so much.
Well, how could we not laugh? Like a dear friend of mine, we were sitting around a campfire recently, and we were looking up at the stars, and he was saying, do you realize that we live in a galaxy and we can actually see the galaxy? And he just looked at me and he said, how could this be? I don't want to, like, I don't want my work to be a downer.
It's not.
It's like, it's really, to me, those two worldviews join at the bottom and in a place of love. And that's where my work really comes from. It's like the reason I bear the pain of standing over dead baby birds on Midway, or standing over an elephant carcass, or doing these images that are about all the bad things in our world. It's not because I hate people or because I want to blame anybody. It's because I love our world. My work is all, they're like acts of love. I believe in our ability to change, and the world is worth taking better care of.
That's incredibly motivating and powerful. And speaking of change, Chris, I went to the phones a second as we were walking back over here, and one of the things, a question about change came up, and it relates to what we kind of opened the show with, your transition, which a lot of people out there who are listening want to know how they can have a more creative life, and a lot of the folks are transitioning or want to transition from a job where they feel safe and they get a paycheck, and there's not wonder and curiosity and fear built into a new era of their life where they can be making the kinds of statements visually, emotionally that you're making. Hot Like Era Bit asks a good question. How did you know that it was time for a career change for you?
Well, all the years that I sat in that law office, I was living with this big fear, and that was my fear of failing if I took the risk of being a full-time photographer. And I had this whole scenario of what would happen. And in retrospect, it's sad, but it felt real at the time. My scenario was, if I leave my legal job, I was living in a condo in downtown Seattle at the time, I won't be successful as a photographer, I won't make any money, I'll run out of money, I'll get behind in my condo payments to the point where maybe 6 months later it'll get foreclosed on. And I didn't really have any close friends or supporters at the time. I was living a kind of false life. And so I didn't have, I was filled with shame, or I wouldn't be able to share with my friends, I'm failing, I'm crashing, I'm burning, can you help me? I anticipated that I wouldn't be able to do that. I have to put on the facade. Everything's fine, I'm doing great. When I'd be running out of money, get my condo foreclosed on, lose all my stuff in the process of that, and sometime during then I would turn to alcohol and drugs to medicate myself, and I'd become a homeless drug addict. I gave myself about a 50-50 chance of having that scenario happen to me, and I sat in that law office. And I thought that my fear of failing was the biggest fear I could think of. And it was like this giant wall, like this brick wall in front of me, and there's no way over it, there's no way under it, there's no way around it. It's like this fear of failure. Well, with the help of a good therapist that I've been working with for 12 years now, he helped me see that there's another fear out there that's way bigger than the fear of failing, and that's the fear of not living my life. And when I connected with that, then it's a different kind of fear. It's not a fear that stops me, it's a fear that motivates me. Like the fear of not living, the fear of becoming old and being filled with regret, realizing I didn't take the risk of living, that was like a giant cowboy boot kicking my ass over the wall. And when I found that fear, then the fear of failing as an artist.
It's like, that's petty. Right?
Yeah, it made it easy. So like there wasn't any great act of courage. It was just, I was motivated by fear. And there's also something about turning 40. It took me until I was almost 40 to take the risk of living my life. And I see all these young people now, high schoolers or in college, or people in their 20s who are thinking, like whoever asked that question, they're thinking it. Well, how do you know? Well, I say just look in your heart and you probably already know, don't you?
That's the part that is, if I want to carry around a little personal mission in not necessarily my photographic work, but in being able to have conversations with you or people like you to keep that just right top of mind. And if I can share that to anybody else in my life and anyone who's listening through a show like this or just a one-on-one conversation over lunch or a coffee, holding that like top of mind, the desire to live the kind of life that you want. If you don't pay attention to that, it recedes. It goes away, and you have to bring it right back there. So, and then to me, that's very much what art does. Art keeps that thing right there present. So that's why I consume a lot of art. I make as much stuff. Like, I'm not always proud of the things that I've made, but making it makes me remember that I'm doing the thing that I was supposed to be doing with my life. And I take a ton of inspiration out of just what you've shared here today. We've had similar conversations before, but again, the questions are really flying in now, so I want to dive into a couple more. Again, I'm Chase Jarvis here with a good friend of mine, photographer Chris Jordan. We got CJ Squared coming at you today. And we're
what? Before we go on,
Sure.
There's one more piece about fear.
Please.
And it is, I was just talking to a group of high school students a couple days ago about this, and it feels important, and that is, I don't believe in conquering fear. Like, to me, what courage is when you're scared, and you acknowledge that you're scared, and you do the thing anyway. And as someone who's leaving a safe job and going into
The unknown.
totally unknown,
Right.
could crash and burn 1,000 different ways, there's naturally going to be fear and anxiety that come with living that kind of life. And it never goes away for me. It's always there. That's one of the feelings you have to bear if you're a person who's fully living.
Yep.
And it's natural, and you're supposed to be scared when you're taking the risk of living.
That's a beautiful. You're supposed to be scared if you're taking the risk of living. The last guest, another good friend of mine, Tim Ferriss, #1 New York Times bestselling author. He sat right where you're sitting right now and told us about fear. And what he does is he is very analytic, and he writes down what's the worst thing that can happen. And so it's lose your house, foreclose, and then what he tries to do is like actually put himself in that position. It's like, okay, here I am. I'm sleeping on the street tonight. Or whatever. Like,
how bad is it?
How bad is it?
Yeah. Oh.
And as a way to work through fear. So I really appreciate that. And you're sharing that again. You just said with high school students. That is something that, if I had someone kind of just whispering that in my ear over and over, it would act as a huge motivator for me. So thank you for sharing that with us. One of the Polaroids that I shot before, one of the Polaroids I just shot, we got to give those away to people who, like, the retweets are just coming in insane numbers right now, which is really cool, but it means the quotes you're dropping them like bombs. People are going nuts. I wanted to give away two quote winners, one at Jennifer, Jenfer, and one Swede Andrews. We're not going to give you the quotes. Just keep them coming. We want to keep this show moving. So I'm going to go back to the phones here, and then we're going to shift gears into the Midway project in just a second. So I'm going to ask this question from Symphonic. Chris, as an artist, how do you balance your thoughts and your emotions through these artistic endeavors with your personal life? Or are they the same?
Well, I'm not so good at that.
We've all got weaknesses, right?
Well, it's funny because on one hand, I feel like I never work anymore. I used to work, and now I don't ever work anymore. Another way to look at it is I never stop working. Like, I'm always working. And it's a real challenge for me to kind of honor the role that I'm being given in the world, to do the work that I'm passionate about, and maintain my relationships. And I'm slowly learning, like, there's an imbalance there. And like, most of the people who are my best friends, I haven't seen them in like 6 months to a year. And I don't spend as much time with my sweetie as I wish I did, because there's always something urgent.
Yeah.
Somebody needs images somewhere to publish, and how could I turn them down? Or somebody's invited me to come and speak at a university for 2 days and visit classes, and like, how can I say no to that?
Right.
And so it's
damn
a
hard.
real challenge. Yeah. But I don't know. And you know, finances are challenging too. It goes up and down. Sometimes we're terribly in debt, and other times we get back to zero. But inside, I feel like a billionaire. You know, it's like it's hard in some ways, and in other ways, like I feel so fortunate.
Amazing answer. I'd like to put down the questions, although keep them coming, because we're going to give away at least 1 or 2 signed Polaroids. I'd like to read the quotes next time if we can from the support staff there. So we'll keep those going. Again, dozens pouring in every minute now, which is it's just fun watching that thing fly. But let's shift over to a recent body of work. It's more recent for me than running the numbers, but you've been working on it for quite some time, so recent might not be the accurate categorization. But Midway Island, give us a short intro, if you would, and then we'll turn to, we have a trailer for a documentary film that you're making. So if you could introduce the trailer, give people a little bit of context, and then we'll cut to the trailer. So
yeah,
the Midway Project, what are you doing?
Well, I was doing some running the numbers pieces about the Pacific Ocean because I heard about this thing called the Pacific Garbage Patch. And I became interested in the Pacific Garbage Patch and learned that it's not something you can photograph. The plastic is underwater, it's broken down into tiny pieces, it's spread out over thousands of miles of ocean. There's not like a floating island of trash that we can behold with our senses and feel the shock of it and then go do something about. It's like this invisible issue, like a lot of the others that I'm interested in. So I was working on some running the numbers pieces about ocean plastic pollution. And I was in a meeting with a bunch of biologists who were studying the issue. And I said, my goal with all my work, but specifically with this one, is to make this global issue personal. And this young woman, Anna Cummins, who's an activist about ocean plastic pollution, she said, well, you want to see the Pacific Garbage Patch personally, go to Midway Island, this tiny little island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and look inside the stomachs of dead baby albatrosses.
Look inside the stomachs of dead baby birds.
And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. And she had been there, and she said, look on the internet and you'll see there are a few kind of bad snapshots of birds filled with plastic. And I was just stunned, and at the same time, the artistic part of me that's been photographing color and is really interested in tonal scale and beauty looked at those scenes and thought, oh my God, they're gorgeous. And in this sort of horrific, uncomfortable way. And so I went there in 2009 and was astonished to discover tens of thousands of dead baby birds on the ground whose stomachs were all filled up with plastic. And since then, the Midway Island has this magnetism. It just keeps pulling me back there. And when I first came back with the images, I put them out there on the internet, and I was really surprised. I thought the series would bomb. I didn't think anybody was interested in seeing photographs of dead birds filled with plastic. And it actually went more viral than any work that I've done previously. It's reached a huge global audience. And the overwhelming response that I got was hopelessness and despair. And when I presented the work publicly, I'll never forget this moment. I was in Australia and I was presenting the work to a group of, in a girls' school. And I showed them the photographs and I said, what are people feeling after seeing this work? You know, someone raised their hand and said, I'm feeling sad, and another girl raised her hand and said, I'm feeling angry. And you know, we sort of went through some processing, and at the end, their teacher stood up and she said, you know, I get that you want us to feel these feelings, but there's a feeling that I'm having that is much deeper and more uncomfortable than any of those, and it's just, I feel overwhelmed and panicked. And like, oh, panic. And I realized that I had stumbled on really powerful medicine with this work, and that I had put it out there in a way that is incomplete. And I went to Terry Tempest Williams, the writer, whose work I've revered for years and years, and I said, you know, having read her books about how she's gone through grief and come out the other side. That's what some of her books are about. And she said, if you want to get to hope, you've got to go all the way through. You got to go back there.
Wow.
And go deeper into the process. I was like, whew, go stand over more of those birds. And it's turned into this multi-year thing that is, and during that process is when I've connected with the ecstatic beauty, you know, the miracle of life and on this island as well. And I realized I need to make a film. And that, talk about jumping off the cliff. I know nothing about filmmaking. I'm a first-time film director, learning which button you press on the camera, and out there trying to make a film. But as you said, the way to be successful is surround yourself with people who know what they're doing. I have this brilliant team of cinematographers and a sound guy and some good mentors who are longtime directors, and we're out there making a film that's going to attempt to bring together the horror and the tragedy and the grief, all the uncomfortable feelings that come with witnessing the tragedy, bring it together with the ecstatic miracle and beauty of the world we live in, and combine them in a way that you can't even tell the difference between them anymore.
Wow. Art with meaning. Let's take a peek at the trailer for the new film that's coming out in some time yet to be disclosed. Take it away, D'Artagnan. Click us over to the Midway Island trailer, if you would.
Do we have the courage to face the realities of our time and allow ourselves to feel deeply enough that it transforms us and our future? Come with me on a journey through the eye of beauty.
across an ocean of grief. And beyond.
Unbelievable. It's overwhelming. Shift gears, first time filmmaker, right? That's very, very cool. You got a crew, you guys go out to Midway, and every time I call you or your studio, it's like, oh, Chris is in Midway, or I'm just going to Midway, or I'm just coming from Midway. It seems to me that you're going almost all the time. It's very, very passion driven for you. You're taking a fair bit of equipment, and you shot that with we'll go to gear just for a second here.
Yeah.
You shot that with the Sony, is that what we were talking about before the
Well, the
broadcast?
ones you just saw were with, I don't even know, because I wasn't the director of the film back then.
Got it.
But more recently, we've switched over to Sony F3s.
Got it.
We brought 2 Sony F3s and a whole set of prime lenses.
Beautiful.
We've been working with those.
We're talking to you about the Alexa, the Ari Alexa as well, right?
Yeah, I'd really love to bring one of those out there.
Got it. It's a whole new ball of wax for photographers moving, and there are a lot of photographers in the audience today who are transitioning into making films. So there's plenty to talk about in that regard. You shoot digital, like your still photographs are digital and medium format, right?
Yeah,
Big
I use
detail.
digital, a studio camera, a digital medium format studio camera.
Take that thing out into the sand and the salt water.
And I took it to Kenya with me. I dropped it on some rocks. It fell off my tripod. And that thing's not sealed. You know, the Canons and the Nikons, they're all sealed with these great little rubber things.
Right.
And you know, the higher end studio cameras just aren't sealed like that.
Right.
And it's, yeah, it's really scary taking like a $50,000 camera out in the salt and the sand and.
Hey, they're just hammers, right? They're just expensive hammers. You got to go out, you got to take them, you got to use them as tools, but it's terrifying sometimes hauling that gear around. Back to the filmmaker question. So, harder than still photography, easier than still photography. I toggle back and forth between them because when I'm trying to capture all of the essence of an idea in one still photograph, it blows my mind. I wish I had some time I could cover here so it'd be easier to tell the story. And then when I'm when I'm shooting a film or a documentary or a video, I'm thinking, God, there's so many things happening right now. I've got camera movements, I've got people movements, I've got action on the scene, I've got music and audio, and so I tossle back and forth between being freaked out about both of them. Where do you fall on the spectrum?
Well, still photography feels easy to me compared to making a film. But one of the things that I've discovered with still photography is its limitation. Yeah. And film, film is just such an incredibly expressive medium.
It's very deep. I mean, not in the cheesy sense of the word deep, but there's a lot of layers to it. You can be very, very perceptive on the audio specifically, for example. A good third of a movie is audio, and nobody realizes that until you get in the trenches and you're making a film, how important audio is. Harry.
Well, in 90 minutes, you can say something with film that you can't say with any other medium. It's an incredibly powerful medium, and I'm starting to watch films just from the point of view of the camera angle.
Yeah.
And I've been watching a bunch of old war films, Full Metal Jacket and Apocalypse Now and so on, just watching where's the dude with the camera and seeing the way they seamlessly cut from from looking from this angle to looking from that angle, and really good filmmakers do it in a way that you don't even notice you're watching a film.
Right.
And yet the point of view is changing in a way that never happens for us in real life.
Right. We are only looking out these windows.
And to choose how do you fit in music, and should there be narration, and like how much do I respect the audience? Like that's something I've been wrestling with. Like I started out with my film project thinking I'm going to make a documentary film. And so we're going to go out there, we're going to say, here we are on Midway Island, and here's this terrible tragedy. But then I thought, well, wait a second. There are lots of films out there where the director respects the audience ability to hold a really complex plot that you don't really understand until at the end of the film. You know those films that go in reverse, or they weave things in, and that's just the director saying, I respect your ability to hold a really complex film and to get more out of it than if it was straightforward. And so I'm thinking, there's like, how can I make a film that really honors the subject? Well, I can sort of bring the viewer's intelligence in and collaborate with them, and
that's so beautiful.
Bring like hard things like grief and beauty together, and trust that they're going to be able to handle it.
There's a director that I really love, and I don't know if you're familiar with his work or not, filmmaker named Errol Morris. He wrote, did The Fog of War, which is McNamara era, like really, really heavy stuff. And he's a particular film of his called Fast, Cheap, and Out of Control, which is an amazing film that unites a mole rat specialist, a topiary gardener, one of the guys who trims stuff to look like dinosaurs, a lion tamer, and an MIT robotics professor. Follows 4 characters and then begins to weave them together in a way that is the most unexpected. It's beautiful, and it does exactly what you're talking about. Expects people to hold a complex story up in the air, and as things are revealed through time in the film, light bulbs are just going off. And it's beautiful, beautiful film. And that is something that I aspire to. And it sounds like have you decided to try and make that film? Are you going to try and make a film that does that, or are you going back to just the straight up docu, here we are, boots on the ground? Where are you at in the process?
Well, I've been out to Midway twice with as the director, and so we have something like 4,000 shots that we've gotten, some stunning video, especially the most recent time we were out there. We were filming the birds dying.
Oh.
And these birds have no fear of humans.
Oh gosh, you were telling me this.
They have no predators. They've never had any predators out there, and so they just don't have programmed into their psyche to be afraid of other creatures. And so, like, if this glass was an albatross on Midway Island, I could have my camera right here with a super wide angle lens, and the bird would be unfazed. And to be this far away from a bird that's body is filled with plastic, and it's gasping its last breath, and its head is slowly tilting over, and to see its head reach the ground and watch its eye blinking the last few times, and then the eye stops blinking, to be that close to it is a stunning experience. And so I've been starting to put that footage together, and one thing that I love about, like, my favorite kind of films are films where there's something starts happening and then it goes over to something else, and you just have to remember that little plot line, and then something else starts happening, and then you just have to remember those 2 things, and the third thing starts happening, and there's sort of like this weaving, this braiding that goes on, and that's how the process has happened for me in real life out there. Like, there's this moment-to-moment experience of absolute horror and ecstatic beauty and joy of being on this island that has probably one of the highest concentrations of wildlife anywhere on the planet.
That dichotomy is so strong.
And to go from moment to moment through that experience, like, that's how I want to make the film. And I've just begun cutting footage together and thinking of how I want to work with music, and it's a monumental task, and it's hard because Luis Ahoyos, who's the director of The Cove, is a friend of mine, and he says you've got an amazing subject. It's not that hard to work with because you can keep going back to the same place, and a bunch of amazing people working with you. He said it's all up to you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. That makes me feel so much better, right?
Oh my. But it's great having him as a mentor. He was the first-time director when he did The Cove.
Amazing.
And he's a
very, very deeply moved by
terrific
The Cove.
guy to work with.
Man, I'd like to open it up one last time for a series of questions. We're going to give away another Polaroid. This last one is to Mike Russell Photo. He tweeted out, "The world is worth taking better care of." Thanks very much, Mike Russell Photo. We'll have a signed Polaroid coming at you. Let's see, what else did I want to do? I wanted to go to the phones and see if anybody else had any wrap-up questions for you. So I'm slowly picking up this iPad and hope that if you're at home, you're typing very rapidly. This has just been an amazing experience. There are more more retweets happening right now. Soren Singh says, reminds you that I feel like a billionaire when you were talking about having your going in and out of debt, but realizing the life you're living is a life that is one that you feel like a billionaire inside. I think that was very, very powerful. Any questions for Chris before we get out of here? There's, wow. So many quotes coming in, so many quotes.
Yeah, it's like how you measure wealth. You know, like I don't measure wealth in money anymore. There are lots of people who have tons of money who I think are living really unhappy and kind of alienated lives. All you have to do is look at our political process. Look, those guys are also unhappy.
Oh, I know, brutally unhappy.
Yeah, it's such a tragedy.
Is there, talk one more time for me just a second about the finding the joy, because there are so many, if you really start, if there are a lot of folks who are paying attention today, I'm sure, who are cause-based photographers. They are familiar with your work. For those who aren't familiar, they probably want to like inject some cause-based work into their lives or into the lives of the people that pay attention to what it is that they do as artists. When you're working at Midway, what's the tilt over to the, yeah, but this is beautiful? How do you go back to that? Otherwise, you're in that despair, right?
Yeah.
And you can't live there for
Well,
long.
we don't even have to go to Midway to get there.
Okay.
Consider what's actually happening right in this moment. From my perspective, here's what, as far as I can tell, here's what's happening. I am an embodied conscious being in this body, sitting in a chair in a city on a round planet in outer space.
That's
and
moving through space at
some ridiculous speed,
right?
And I don't know a lot about our biosphere. Nobody can know all of it. But from what I know, it's this incomprehensibly, miraculously complex system that created me, as well as all the other beings and creatures and plants on Earth. And as far as we know, this is the only place in the universe where this is happening. And I'm sitting here now, and here is another embodied conscious being who, like me, won the lottery ticket of the universe in getting to be born. Holy shit.
Wow.
And there are all these problems we got to solve together. And if we could have a conversation about it, and if our culture could remember the sacred miracle that we've all been born into, I don't mean sacred in a religious way, I mean in some kind of wondrous, incomprehensible way, if we could remember that, and if we can remember how much we love what we've been given, then it seems like some of these problems wouldn't be so hard to face and do something about.
I cannot fathom ending on anything other than that sentiment from you, Chris. That is the most perfect thing to end on. And as much as I want to sit here and talk to you all day, the cameras are probably running out of batteries. That has been it's been a very, very emotionally charged, amazing show. I'm very, very grateful for your time. Again, if you're tuned in late, I've been here, I'm Chase Jarvis, and I've been here for 90 minutes now talking with photographer Chris Jordan about his cause-based work, his transition from an attorney to an artist who's making a very profound difference in the world. Holy smokes. Take a look at Chris's work, chrisjordan.com. The Midway film is midwayfilm.com. Gosh, man, it's been a huge, huge honor. I've got to
So good to see you
thank
again,
you,
Chase.
man.
Thanks for the work you're doing.
Oh, please. This is, again, there's some selfish motivations here. I get to sit down with you and other folks who are a freaking genius miracle like you, and sit in that chair, and I get to talk to you, and you get to tell the world what it is that you do, and that's incredibly meaningful to me. I'm going to take a second to sign off here. What have I got to do? I've got to say a couple of things. Let's see. Where is my outro? I know, for one, I'm incredibly grateful to the fine folks at Polaroid for bringing this, making this whole show possible. I'm going to shoot another Polaroid of you as the credits start to roll, so that we can have another one of those to give away. See, I want to remind you folks that I'm going to be in New York all next week at the 50-50-50 exhibition and gallery show and benefit auction at the Phillips de Pury Gallery and auction space in New York City. Please, ping me, take a look at that. I'd really, really love it. What else do I got here? Oh goodness, oh yeah, again, pay attention to Chris's work. I'm Chase Jarvis, it's just at Chase Jarvis on Twitter. Right here to the right, if you've liked what you see, we're gonna continue to do stuff like this, and you can put your email in that box and we'll let you know in advance. And I think last but not least, if you go to the blog, there's a really weird story that I had published while we were working here today about Annie Leibovitz shooting for Sears of the Kardashian twins. What a disconnect something like that is from this, and I did that on purpose. The juxtaposition of those things is remarkable. So click over to the blog and read that. It's very, I don't know what to make of it, but I know it's bizarre. So I'm gonna sign off, and again, a huge thank you, Chris, for everything that you've done for the world and here coming on our show, buddy.
So good to see you.
We're gonna
again,
continue to pay attention very closely to what it is
thank
that you
you.
do, and Godspeed, good luck. Keep doing what you're doing. Without further ado, that wraps up another episode of Chase Jarvis Live. Mwah, mwah. Thank you so much for being so kind to us and asking all those questions and saying all those beautiful quotes or retweeting those. Until next time, I bid you adieu. Thanks very much, Chris. Buddy, appreciate it.
The new to the old, the old to the new, the new to the old, the old to the new, the new to the old.